The setting in the Gruber family. In the early 20th century, southern Germany still carried the air of old rural traditions. Tiny villages lay scattered among vast forests, dirt roads wound through fields, and modest wooden houses stood surrounded by barley crops, haystacks, and animal barns. About a few kilometers from the village of Gruber stood a farm called Hinterkaifeck, a name that already evoked remoteness and solitude, as though the place were cut off from the outside world. The farm was not among the wealthiest, but it was large enough to provide a stable income for the Gruber family. Surrounded by thick woods and muddy paths that became nearly impassable in the rainy season, Hinterkaifeck seemed like an island of isolation in the middle of the countryside. Its seclusion gave it a strange duality. On the one hand, it was peaceful and quiet; on the other hand, it was unnervingly desolate, especially at night when only the wind through the trees and the faint sounds of livestock broke the silence. Locals often said that passing by the farm after sunset felt like stepping into another world. The darkness grew heavier, sounds echoed strangely, and the atmosphere seemed to wrap around you like an invisible hand. The Gruber family. Living at Hinterkaifeck was the Gruber family, made up of 6 members. Andreas Gruber, 63, the patriarch, a stern, conservative, and notoriously difficult man. A former soldier, he lived by strict discipline, sometimes bordering on cruelty. In the village, people knew him as someone who often clashed with others, rarely smiled, and was suspected of domestic violence. Kazalia Gruber, 72, Andreas's wife, frail and worn down by age. She spent most of her life in silence and resignation, enduring hardships at the side of her domineering husband. Neighbors pitied her more than they respected her. Victoria Gabriel, 35, daughter of Andreas and Kazalia. A widow, her husband, Karl Gabriel, was believed to have died in World War I. She lived at the farm with her parents and raised her 2 children. In the village, she was seen as a tragic figure, bereaved, trapped, and surrounded by scandal. Rumors swirled that she had fallen victim to incestuous abuse within her own family. Kazalia Gabriel, 7, Victoria's eldest daughter, a bright and lively child. Yet, neighbors often noted the sadness in her eyes, as if she already understood the heavy atmosphere of the household. Joseph Gabriel, 2, the youngest child, whose paternity was a matter of constant speculation. Some believed he was the son of a local man, while others whispered that his grandfather Andreas was the real father. This rumor, if true, cast a shadow of unspeakable shame over the family. Maria Baumgartner, 44, the new maid, who arrived on March 31, 1922, fateful timing. Tragically, she would only live at Hinterkaifeck for a single day before becoming one of its victims. Altogether, the Gruber household was far from a picture of domestic harmony. They were surrounded by secrets, conflicts, and scandals. The oppressive weight of those private matters would later become central to the theories about what really happened. What makes the Hinterkaifeck case so chilling are the strange incidents that occurred shortly before the murders. Footsteps in the attic. Days before the tragedy, young Kazalia told her classmates that she heard footsteps above the ceiling at night. When Victoria and Andreas went to check, they found nothing. Still, the story left the family uneasy. Nobody had any reason to be in the attic. The missing key. Andreas complained that one of the keys to the farmhouse had gone missing. It raised the disturbing possibility that someone could enter without forcing the doors. Footprints in the snow. One morning, Andreas noticed footprints leading from the nearby forest directly to the farmhouse, but there were no prints showing a return path. Whoever made them had seemingly disappeared into the house. The strange newspaper. A copy of a newspaper was found on the kitchen table, one the family insisted they had never purchased. Its presence suggested that someone else had brought it inside, or worse, that someone was already living there unseen. Each of these details seemed like a fragment of a puzzle, warnings that something was terribly wrong. Yet, no one could have predicted the horror that was about to unfold. Neighbors later testified that the family appeared increasingly anxious in their final days. Victoria grew quiet, Andreas often patrolled around the property, and even little Kazalia seemed frightened. One chilling detail, the 7-year-old girl confided to her classmates. "There is something in our house. That innocent statement, when recalled after the murders, struck terror into everyone who heard it. Was the killer already hiding within the farmhouse, watching them, waiting for the moment to strike? On March 31, 1922, the Gruber family began their day as usual, unaware that it would be their last. The new maid, Maria, arrived for her first day of work, carrying with her the hope of a fresh start. None of them knew that when the gate of Hinterkaifeck closed that morning, it would never open again for those inside. That night, a nightmare would descend upon the farm. 6 lives would be extinguished under the hand of an invisible murderer. Darkness falls over Hinterkaifeck. On March 31, 1922, the late spring air in Bavaria carried a chill, and night fell quickly. The fields surrounding Hinterkaifeck sank into thick darkness, broken only by faint moonlight filtering through heavy clouds. From a distance, the farmhouse and barn loomed like a single black mass, isolated in the stillness. Inside the small kitchen, Kazalia Gruber stoked the fire to prepare dinner. The simple smell of food filled the air. The new maid, Maria Baumgartner, still unfamiliar with her surroundings, quietly tidied up. She felt uneasy in the strangely heavy atmosphere. This was her very first night at Hinterkaifeck, and it would also be her last. At dusk, as the family gathered together, a faint noise echoed from the barn. Andreas, ever cautious, immediately went to investigate. Carrying a lantern, he crossed the muddy yard, his figure swallowed by shadows. Many believe this was the moment when the killer first lured a victim outside. The intruder seemed to know Andreas's suspicious nature and deliberately made the sound to draw him in. When Andreas failed to return, Kazalia Gruber went after her husband. Then, Victoria, their daughter, followed as well. One by one, as if pulled by an invisible hand, they stepped into the darkness of the barn. Finally, little Kazalia, just 7 years old, likely heard the commotion or her mother's voice. She too went outside, and never came back. Inside the barn, lantern light flickered against the old wooden walls. It was here that the killer struck with merciless force. Andreas Gruber is believed to have been the first victim, struck on the head with a heavy farm tool, possibly a mattock or axe. The blow killed him instantly. Kazalia Gruber followed, offering no chance for resistance. Victoria Gabriel, who may have fought back, received multiple crushing blows to the skull. Last was little Kazalia, 7 years old. Injuries on her body later revealed that she may have lingered alive for hours in agony before succumbing. All 4 bodies were dragged together and covered with hay, as if the murderer sought either to conceal them or perform some grotesque ritual. After killing 4 in the barn, the murderer entered the house. Maria Baumgartner, the maid, was resting in her room, unaware of the horror outside. The intruder found her there. With a swift blow, her life was ended. Her body was later discovered covered with a bedsheet. Joseph Gabriel, the 2-year-old boy, lay sleeping in his crib. The killer did not spare him. The child was murdered where he lay, his tiny body covered with his mother's dress. In just a few hours, the Gruber family and their maid were annihilated. 6 lives extinguished in the silence of the night, yet not a single neighbor heard a scream. What is most chilling is that the killer apparently did not leave immediately. Evidence later revealed that he may have stayed at the farm for days. Food in the kitchen had been eaten. The livestock had been fed and cared for. Smoke had been seen rising from the chimney, leading neighbors to believe the family was still alive. This raised terrifying questions. How long did the murderer remain in the farmhouse, surrounded by the corpses? And why did he act as if Hinterkaifeck were his home? The following day, the farmhouse remained eerily quiet. On Sunday, the family failed to appear at church, and no one saw them in the fields. Neighbors began to wonder but assumed they were busy. Only days later, when the silence grew too suspicious, did villagers go to check the property, where they uncovered the horrifying truth. After the night of March 31, 1922, Hinterkaifeck fell into an eerie stillness. Neighbors, accustomed to seeing the Gruber family working in the fields daily, suddenly noticed no one outside. April 1st, no sign of the family. Villagers assumed they were occupied with private matters. April 2nd, Sunday came, but the Grubers did not appear at church. This was highly unusual, since they were known for their regular attendance. April 3rd, 7-year-old Kazalia was absent from school. Her teacher grew concerned. April 4th, the milk delivery sat untouched outside the door. Strangely, the livestock still appeared to be fed, yet no one came out to collect the milk. The silence began to feel unnatural. Some neighbors knocked on the door but received no answer. At night, smoke was still seen rising from the chimney, leading them to believe the family was still inside. In hindsight, this detail chilled everyone. The murderer may have remained on the farm for days after the killings. On April 4, 1922, a group of neighbors, including Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a man once romantically involved with Victoria, decided to investigate. Inside the barn, in the dim light, they followed the faint smell of decay until they uncovered a ghastly sight. 4 bodies, Andreas, his wife Kazalia, Victoria, and young Kazalia, were piled together beneath a layer of hay. Blood stains covered the floor, evidence of a savage attack. When they entered the house, they found Maria Baumgartner in her bedroom, her corpse covered with bed linen. In another small room lay 2-year-old Joseph, murdered in his crib, his tiny body draped with his mother's dress. The neighbors were struck dumb with horror. Some later admitted they could hardly believe what they were seeing. The police were called immediately. However, the crime scene was already compromised. Dozens of villagers had entered out of curiosity, trampling through rooms and barns, disturbing crucial evidence. Some even took household items as grim souvenirs. By the time investigators from Munich arrived, many clues had been destroyed. Still, they recorded the following. The victim's head wounds suggested the use of a heavy farm tool, most likely a mattock. There were no signs of struggle inside the house, only in the barn. Valuables had not been stolen, ruling out simple robbery as a motive. Forensic doctors performed autopsies on site, under crude conditions, a serious limitation that reduced the reliability of results. Andreas and Victoria suffered multiple heavy blows to the skull. Elder Kazalia, 72, died instantly from head trauma. Young Kazalia, 7, appeared to have survived for hours after the first blow. She had torn out clumps of her own hair in agony, a detail that horrified investigators. Maria, the maid, had been struck without warning and killed instantly. Joseph, too, was also killed instantly, likely with a single blow. More disturbing still, some investigators remarked that the bodies showed less decomposition than expected. This suggested someone had opened windows for ventilation, and indeed, the animals had been fed, clear signs that the murderer remained in the house for days. As the search continued, investigators uncovered several puzzling details. The missing key was never found. In the attic, disturbed hay suggested someone may have lived there. The unfamiliar newspaper was indeed found in the house, as earlier reported. Footprints were noted, but most had been obliterated by curious villagers walking over them. All of this painted a sinister picture. The killer seemed familiar with the farm, calm enough to linger, and even cared for the livestock, acting as though Hinterkaifeck were his own home. News of the massacre spread quickly across Bavaria. The village of Gruber fell into panic. A brutal murderer was still at large, perhaps even living among them. The funeral of the 6 victims drew crowds in mourning. Their bodies were buried, but their skulls were retained for forensic study. Tragically, these skulls were later lost during World War II and never recovered. After the Bavarian police released their initial findings, the Hinterkaifeck murders became the focus of enormous public attention. 6 members of a family were brutally slain, the scene littered with bizarre details, yet robbery was clearly not the motive. The absence of a clear reason behind the massacre fueled speculation, giving rise to multiple theories, each one exposing a different shadowy aspect of the isolated farmstead. The prime suspect in the eyes of both villagers and police was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor who had once been romantically involved with Victoria. It was rumored that Lorenz even wanted to marry her, and some whispered that little Joseph might be his son rather than the child of some unknown father. Suspicion grew for several reasons. On the day the bodies were discovered, Lorenz was the first to unlock the barn and uncover the corpses. He appeared unnervingly calm, moving hay off the bodies to check more closely. He openly declared Joseph was his child and had previously quarreled with the Grubers over paternity. For many, this provided both motive and opportunity, rage at being rejected or a desire to erase the Grubers in order to claim land or custody. Yet no direct evidence ever surfaced. Lorenz was interrogated several times but ultimately released. Theory: another line of investigation pointed toward the possibility of a vagrant or deserter from post-World War I Germany. The country was filled with displaced men, many resorting to theft or violence to survive. This theory was supported by strange footprints found near the farm, reports of noises in the attic before the murders, the mysterious newspaper discovered in the house. But the idea of a random drifter faltered under scrutiny. If theft was the motive, why was nothing valuable stolen? Why would a stranger remain in the house for days afterward, feeding the livestock and cooking meals? Such behavior suggested someone with familiarity, or even attachment, to the farm. Some researchers later suggested the killer may have been a person known to the family, possibly even a distant relative. Evidence pointing this way included knowledge of the house's layout, confidence to remain on the farm undetected, a strange calmness in covering the bodies and tending to the animals, as if preserving the normal rhythm of the household. Local gossip also swirled around the rumored incestuous relationship between Andreas Gruber and his daughter Victoria. If true, it might have fueled deep resentment, blackmail, or vengeance that escalated into bloodshed. Over the course of the investigation, dozens of suspects were interrogated, from vagabonds to neighbors to distant relatives. At one point, a group of soldiers once stationed nearby was questioned. But again, evidence was lacking. Years later, villagers recalled a man drunkenly confessing in a tavern to the Hinterkaifeck murders. By the time police revisited the claim, the man had already died. His confession was dismissed as nothing more than barroom gossip. In the 20th and 21st centuries, journalists and criminologists revisited the case, proposing new interpretations. Multiple killers, arguing the sheer number of victims required at least two perpetrators. The mental illness hypothesis, suggesting the murderer was a deranged individual who killed compulsively, yet obsessively tended to the animals as part of a delusional routine. Renewed suspicion of Schlittenbauer. Some modern analyses circle back to Lorenz, highlighting his unusual behavior and strong personal motives linked to love, jealousy, and land disputes. Yet, as with earlier theories, none can be proven conclusively. Despite hundreds of pages of testimony, the Bavarian authorities ultimately failed to solve the case. The bodies were buried. The victims' skulls, kept for forensic study, were later lost during World War II. By 1923, the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse itself was demolished. No one dared to live in the place where such horror had unfolded. The case thus passed into history as one of Germany's most enduring unsolved mysteries. The Hinterkaifeck murders were more than a criminal case, they became a scar in the collective memory of Bavaria. For years, villagers in Gruber spoke of the tragedy in hushed tones. Children were warned never to pass through the field where the house once stood. Adults avoided mentioning Hinterkaifeck after dark. The site was quickly branded as cursed ground, a place where evil had once walked. No one dared rebuild the farmhouse, and in 1923 it was demolished. Though crops grew again on the land, to the villagers it remained a field soaked in blood. The case also left a deep mark on German criminal investigation practices. Experts realized allowing villagers to enter the scene had destroyed vital evidence. Crude, on-site autopsies undermined scientific accuracy. The victims' skulls, preserved for study but later lost during World War II, highlighted poor evidence management. Hinterkaifeck became a classic case study for German police academies, a stark lesson in the importance of strict procedure, crime scene preservation, and scientific evidence handling. In the decades that followed, the Hinterkaifeck murders resurfaced repeatedly in cultural memory. Books and journalism, countless works of nonfiction and crime analysis revisited the case as a haunting mystery. Film and documentaries, German and international productions recreated the massacre, leaving audiences unsettled. Podcasts and true crime forums. In the modern era, Hinterkaifeck is discussed alongside infamous cases such as Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac Killer. The image of the stranger in the attic continues to terrify, the primal fear that someone might be watching you from within your own home. Even nearly a century later, efforts were made to unmask the killer. In 2007, a group of German police academy students reopened the case file using modern criminological methods. Their analysis suggested the murderer's identity could be strongly inferred, but with no surviving physical evidence, the case could never be formally solved. Historians have also traced the Gruber family tree and examined their social ties, but these inquiries end in speculation. With every witness long dead, the truth has been buried beyond recovery. Today, Hinterkaifeck stands not only as an unsolved murder but as a symbol of nameless evil lurking in ordinary life. A seemingly quiet family plagued by rumors of incest, land disputes, and hidden resentments. A murderer who, after slaughtering them, calmly lived in the house among the corpses. A community left terrified and powerless in the face of the inexplicable. The story reflects not just the destruction of a family, but the fragility of human existence against violence and the unknown. More than a century has passed, yet the true identity of the Hinterkaifeck killer remains unknown. The farmhouse is gone, the witnesses are dead, the skulls of the victims lost in war, as though history itself conspired to conceal the truth. It is precisely this shroud of mystery that makes Hinterkaifeck one of the world's most notorious cases, a tale both real and ghostly, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs into shadow.